had somebody arguing with me on Facebook, talking about how they got their psychology degree and everything. And I don't have a degree in psychology, but I've read the same books. I had a friend that took psychology, and I read their college course books. And let's just back all the way up at the beginning of psychology. You got a few big names like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. And but this Sigmund Freud, that they base a lot of stuff on. This man was a pervert who wanted to have sex with his own mama. He had dreams, and he come to the conclusion that he was in love with his mama, and he thought that all children were attracted to their parents. He sort of thought that he did not understand the concept of real love. He thought it was all connected to sex. He thought everything was connected to sex. And while, he thought that examining the childhood, that's how you figure out all of everything, because he didn't really understand the plasticity of the brain. There was a lot of things they didn't understand back then. And a lot of it is pseudoscience bullshit. It really is. A lot of it's just to sell pills. And a lot of it is, there's a lot of arrogance behind someone who thinks that they can just, in a few conversations, understand someone's mind better than the individual themselves. I think sometimes too much credit's given to these people. And they're almost all psychologists were on board with the idea that forget gender dysphoria. I mean, obviously that's a mental disorder, but they used to always be in agreement that homosexuality was a mental disorder. But they wanted to take it off the list, and they never produced any kind of scientific reason why to take it off the list. Homosexuals went and took psychology, got degrees in psychology, and made it to the board, and then for political reasons took it off the list. This then allowed people to begin to protest and to have all these demonstrations and gay pride and promote homosexuality in a way that they couldn't when it was classified as a mental illness. And I have seen no convincing evidence whatsoever that it should have ever been taken off the list of mental illnesses. And so, a lot of these, you look at Sigmund Freud. I don't see any reason anyone should take him as an authority whatsoever. The man was addicted to cocaine, and he confessed that he was in love with his own mama. So why would anyone go to that pervert and that man for advice about mental health? A lot of these Jewish psychologists that were in Germany that started the whole field of psychology were perverts. They were perverted, and they pushed very perverted ideas. And I think there's a lot of just self-evident truths that people have chosen to be willingly blind to. There's a lot of propaganda and a lot of advertisement. There's a lot of money being put to push certain ideas and to normalize abnormal, unhealthy behaviors. Now, right now, a lot of people get mad at me for saying the things I just said. But it used to be the worldview of everyone. There was barely anyone that would disagree with me. Used to, if you would have said homosexuality is disgusting and it is a mental illness, everybody would have agreed. Except one straight person here or there, almost everyone would have agreed with that. And then through the media, through comedy, and through, homosexuals getting on the board of psychology and taking it off the list, and then all this advertisement, all this to push it over, dang, it's been a while now. I mean, it might be close to like 100 years by now. There's been an effort to push this idea as normal in the population. You might have, if you are about my age, you'll remember that on the media, they used to just blatantly lie all the time and say 10% of the population. But there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever that it was 10% of the population. Every survey come back less than 2%. Most places was less than 1%. Only in the most gay city of San Francisco was they ever to get 1.8% of the population being homosexual. Yet at school and on the media, the lie was repeated over and over again. It's 10%, it's 10%. Because they were trying to normalize something that was abnormal. And you got to think about this. There is a genetic advantage to being disgusted by homosexuality. Because homosexuality does not help you reproduce. So there's a benefit to having an aversion to it. There's a benefit to being disgusted by it. There's a benefit to being attracted to the opposite sex and disgusted by the idea of having sex with the same sex, because that's what allows you to reproduce and survive and carry on your bloodline and your genes. Ask yourself, what's the benefit? What is the benefit of homosexuality? To go extinct? There is no benefit. There's no benefit to it whatsoever. What's the benefit to not being disgusted by it? There's no benefit to it. So, I think that my disgust for it is natural. And I think that it took a whole bunch of propaganda and indoctrination for people to feel like it's wrong not to accept it. Why would you accept something that is a generational suicide? It is generational suicide. Why would you accept something that's going to cut your lifespan from 80 to 50? And then also, and I enter this as evidence that it's a mental disorder, why are homosexuals, why do they disproportionately have such high rate of other mental disorders? It's just... Now, I don't, and I think that there's, whenever you accept something as your identity, we're going to run into cognitive dissonance when you run into facts or anything that contradicts what you think is your very own identity. And so people have been made to feel like, that they have no choice, that this is who they are, that this is their identity. And there's something that's not talked about. Now, I wasn't a licensed therapist, but when I went to high school, everybody come to me with their problems. They did my daddy the same way. I had a girl, I'm not going to say any names, right? But there was this girl that was molested by her father. She told me. Why would she tell me? I don't know. There was this boy that was beat by his stepdad, and he told me about it. People would just come to me, and it was a hard burden to bear, because it's hard to be happy when everybody comes to you for comfort about the darkest things in their life. But people felt comfortable talking to me about it, and people wanted to know my advice about things. And I noticed something that a lot of other psychologists and therapists notice if they're being honest. So I had this man, he was a homosexual, and he come in and he talked to me, and he was molested as a child. And this is very common. This is something you don't hear about, but it is very common for homosexual men and lesbian women to have been molested as a child. And I think that's significant. There's another thing that's very common. Them to have an overbearing mother. Not always. Sometimes it's a mother that just accepts whatever behavior. But a lot of times they have a bad relationship with their father. They have an absent father, or they hate their father, or they hate their mother. It's very common for a homosexual to have a parent that they hate. It's very common for a homosexual to have been molested. And then also, it is advertised. It is incentivized. It is put in little cartoons for kids. The whole thing is being pushed on the population. And I think all the way back to when they put Bugs Bunny in a dress and had him kiss Elmer Fudd, I think that was inappropriate. That's homosexuality, that's bestiality, that's cross-dressing. And people said, oh, it's fine, it's just a cartoon. Jesus, he talked about how you can have this perfume that smells really good, but it can be ruined by a gnat, by a dead fly in it. It can ruin the whole thing, I think that there was a lot of evil, a lot of harmful behaviors that should have been called out a long time ago before it got to this point. And people just didn't have the balls to do it. They just didn't want to call it out. And then we've gotten into this mess. And they got women to support it first by appealing to empathy, by saying these people are victims, these people are marginalized. And I remember seeing the change, because I was born in 1987. I've seen the culture shift a lot with the introduction of satellite television, and then I've seen the culture shift a lot more with the introduction to the internet. And I noticed how it started. Everybody was against it and said it was perversion. And first they got the women to accept it. Women like To His Company and the different comedies on TV. First, they had some high-profile victim cases. And then the women started putting pressure on the men to accept it. The men were the last to accept it. The men were just, And you see the women there's a lot of liberal women that are like, well, and I experienced this myself, right? There would be women that would be interested in dating me until they found out that I was anti-abortion. And then they're like, oh, I can't date a man that doesn't believe in women's rights to murder their own child. And you'd see the same thing. I had this woman, she lost interest when she found out that I believed that homosexuality was a mental disorder. And I'm okay with that, Brittany doesn't see it as something that's a non-dateable offense. But, a lot of women started putting pressure on men. They're like, we're not going to give you sex unless you embrace this new form of degeneracy. And, and a lot of, I'm going to look at the comments. He's just spreading propaganda. I saw an article, the Occam's razor is, that sodomy is unhealthy, that it lowers your life expectancy and it creates a higher rate of disease. And I saw this article, and they had showed that homosexuals had shorter lifespans, that higher rates of disease, and they were trying to blame it on prejudice. They were saying, well, doctors must be biased against homosexuals and don't give them as good a medical treatment. And that's not a logical conclusion to come to. They didn't want to see the truth right in front of their face, that it's just unhealthy. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for the mind. It's not healthy for the body. It's not healthy for society. And it has no redeeming quality whatsoever. It is a confusion. The purpose of sex is reproduction. The pleasure of sex is the incentive to reproduce. Where the reason sex feels good is so you'll do it. The purpose of it is to reproduce. Homosexuality is a perversion and a confusion where people are sexually attracted in a way where they can't reproduce. So it harms them. They're not able to pass on their bloodline. They go extinct. If it's a perfect weapon for an enemy. Like let's say if you had a nation that you were at war with, it would be good for you if that nation decided to all be gay and all have abortion and all watch pornography. And I think this is something that the West doesn't realize. The promotion of homosexuality, the promotion of abortion, the promotion of this is a weapon against us. We're called Amalek. We've been called Amalek for at least 100 years by certain Jews. And they wrote books about it, and there's certain rabbis that openly say they want all European people to go extinct. And I've got a list of non-government organizations that are Jewish-owned that fund transgenderism. And I'm going to make another video because I gotta go. Right now I'm on my phone. I'm driving home, but I'm gonna list them. I'm gonna name every one of these organizations, and I'm gonna show you that I'm not just pulling this out of my ass. That this is real. That there is a lot of Jewish money being put to try to spread the propaganda to white nations to be gay, to be transgender, putting money behind pornography, and putting money behind abortion. And it is a weapon against us. There are people who want us dead. The reason that Nick Jr. and the Disney Channel promote homosexuality to our children is it is a weapon against us by people who want us extinct. And so some people are victims of that propaganda. Now, the nature of perversion is that people become desensitized to it. At first, you get a little taste of perversion, and it's exciting. It may be accompanied with a sick feeling, but there's an excitement with it. There's some people that just sort of feel dead inside, and so they push into further and further degeneracy. But at first there's that excitement from the degeneracy, but then the person becomes numb to it. And so they seek further and further perversion. And there's this life cycle where a lot of homosexuals, while they're young, there's older homosexuals that are willing to pay their bills. They're willing to spend money on them. But as they get older, that starts to fade away. And they start to switch roles. They go from being the one to the other. And the way the nature of perversion works, they want younger and younger and younger until they become pedophiles. And then the pedophiles increase the chance of the child growing. Children that are molested, a lot of times they'll have a compulsive disorder, whether that be sex or overeating or drugs. It'll normally lead to them trying to cope with the trauma with some type of compulsiveness. But there are the children that get molested that grow up to be molesters. There's the children that get molested that grow up to want to go kill the molesters. And there's no such thing as Stockholm Syndrome. And I'm not saying, it doesn't justify it. Being a victim of a crime doesn't justify you going and perpetrating that crime on other people. I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm not trying to justify it. But I'm just saying that this is a real cycle of perversion that you're not going to be taught about. That a lot of these homosexuals were molested. A lot of these homosexuals eventually wind up becoming molesters, and that they reproduce through pedophilia. Homosexuality reproduces itself through pedophilia. If you get rid of one, you get rid of the other pretty much. If you was to completely ban homosexuality, you would see a sharp reduction in a child molestation. And if you got rid of child molestation, you would see a sharp reduction of homosexuality. And this is something that is very taboo. This is something because they want you to believe that some people are just carrying the gay gene, that they're just carrying some kind of gene where they're born with this sort of curse to where they won't reproduce, where they're attracted to something that's going to be bad for their health, shorten their lifespan, wipe out their bloodline. And it's simply not true. No one was born homosexual. It's a mental disorder, and there's a lot of different variables that play into it. And people aren't honest about it. I'm not making baseless assertions. It's just that, like I said, it's a weapon against our people. It's promoted as a weapon to destroy us. It is destructive. There is no redeeming quality with homosexuality. There's no merit to it. It is simply perversion. It is an inversion of the natural order. It is absolutely perverted. It is misdirection of sexual energy from that which will reproduce to that will not. And it is not natural. There is no homosexual act with gays or lesbians that in any way is natural or the intended purpose of or function of the human body. Now, there's no benefit. There's no benefit to homosexuals adopting children for that child. It's harmful for the child. Just not have the hormones of the child are affected by the genders that the child is around. If you were to take the biological father, you can't even replace a biological father with a stepfather. If you take the biological father of a daughter away from her, and then you put a stepdaddy there, the hormones and the pheromones trigger a different rate of sexual maturity. If basically the body goes into sort of like, it's like safety's been taken away. It goes into sort of a fight. Like also, if you take the father out of the home with boys and they're just around women, like let's say if you was to take a boy and instead of them being in a 2-parent household, instead of him being with his biological parents, he's adopted by lesbians, his cortisol levels his stress hormone will be up through the roof and his testosterone levels will drop. They're not even going to be hormonally healthy. There's no way to place a child to homosexual parents and then have normal hormones at healthy levels. It's going to mess with their hormones. Pheromones play a role in this. And then there's imprinting. There's so many different reasons in psychological development where it is going to be harmful for the child. I would say that it is reckless and child abuse to let a homosexual couple adopt a child. It's gonna fuck up their hormones. It's gonna fuck up their sexual development. It's in no kind of way is it natural. Yes, you know what? It's not natural for animals to build roads or houses or computers. You could look at an animal and you could, that basically it's like, you can see animals that eat their own children. You can see, there's animals. There was a grown cat that raped a little baby cat. But you would be a fool to look at the animals to model after. We're the apex animals. We have a prefrontal cortex that's way more developed than animals. We're able to reason far beyond what animals are. And if you're looking to an animal as an example of how to live, what are you wanting to go backwards? Are you wanting to lose progress? It reminds me sort of something I read in Romans where it's talking about these people, they become like beasts because they did not think that the divine was worth knowing. Now, I do think that, yes, beavers build dams. Birds build nests. It's just as natural for a human being to build a skyscraper as a bird to build a nest. But what I'm saying is we outdo them. There's nothing that any of these animals do that they build or that are nothing about the way that they reason that we don't outdo them, that we don't outperform them. You know, like if I was to want to learn how to do anything, I wouldn't look to someone to teach me that's worse at it than I am. So why would I go to an animal that has less ability to reason to try to model my life after it? Let's say, oh, I found a dog. I found a dog doing a homosexual act. Let's copy the dog. That means it's okay for me. You know, the humans have enough sense with their prefrontal cortex to reason the purpose of sex is reproduction, that the pleasure is an incentive. Homosexuals have detached reason from sex. They're just driven by passion, almost like an animal, basically. Uh, they're just being ruled hedonistically off of pleasure, divorced from reason. They're just saying, "Oh, I feel like it, so I'm going to do it. I'm not going to have any restraint. I'm not going to have any impulse control. I'm almost going to live as if I'm an animal. I'm not going to use any reasoning. I'm not going to think, this is going to basically extinct my bloodline." They're not thinking about that. They're basically behaving like animals. And I think that's why a lot of times they say, well, look, the animals are doing it. Yeah, but, you know, let's progress past what we are now. Let's have a divine standard to go toward instead of an animal standard. Okay. It isn't healthy. You know, we find you can find mental illness in animals too. So I guess, you know, if you want to say that, it depends on how you want to use natural. You could expand the definition of natural to include everything that happens. So I guess I should say it's not healthy. It's destructive. Homosexuality is destructive to those who practice it, and it hurts your bloodline. It hurts your health. It hurts you in this lifetime, and it's basically you're taking, instead of sex being used for reproduction, sex is being used to reproduce sexually transmitted diseases, to create a breeding ground for sexually transmitted diseases. They have a high rates of, you know, like everyone, they had the whole AIDS scare, but pretty much only homosexuals has had to worry about it. They try to do the whole monkey pox scare, but pretty much only homosexuals had to worry about it. And people who shared drug needles with them, or people who were bisexual crossing over into the straight population, the diseases from homosexuals. It's, you know, homosexuals barely ever live past 50. They're not happy. Most of them are not happy. Most of them, they have increased rate of drug use and increased rate of other mental disorders. It's traumatizing to the brain. It's not good for their own psyche. Is it conducive to human flourishing or not? If it shortens your lifespan, if it takes away your sanity, I wouldn't say it was healthy. If you know, only 20%, you know, like of male bloodlines make it throughout time. You know, the fact that any man is alive means, you know, he's a son of a man that survived. His father survived, his father survived, his father survived, his father survived. And after all that effort, after all that sweat and blood and all that effort to bring that bloodline to be, how devastating it would be for a man to just be gay. To just, his whole bloodline is just destroyed because he wants to act like an animal with unbridled passion and lust. Not love, lust, just sexual desire, not targeted to reproduction, not bonding with the other gender. I'm going to scroll up so I can read all of this. No, uh, I do genuinely believe what I'm saying. I wouldn't be saying it if I didn't believe it. And I've always, by my own labor, by my own sweat, bought stuff. I don't even take EBT. Like, I don't even take government assistance. I've definitely never had a sugar daddy or anything like that. I think it's unmanly to get money from other men to buy your food. So not only do I not have a sugar, nothing like that. I don't even take government assistance. I work, I buy my own stuff. Men should provide for themselves and other women and children. Men should not parasitically leech off of other men, or else they're still boys and they haven't grown up. So no. And they're not gonna pass on their genes. And I don't know. Do you know that the rate of homosexuality in animals goes up in captivity? They're way less likely for there to be homosexual acts done with animals when they're given ample space and all. It's more likely it happens more in captivity, and also a lot of them are not. They don't just become like all the way home. Animals get confused. Animals will sometimes. Some animals are on a spectrum just like people. There are such thing as evil animals. There are such thing as mentally ill animals. But they're not going to outcompete the animals that are not confused. The animals that are straight are going to pass on their genes. Okay, so I should say, instead of saying what I mean by it isn't natural, I should say it isn't healthy and it isn't normal. It's not normal. It is perversion. It is an exception. It's not the normal state. And the thing about, the reason that we have to have soldiers is because other people are soldiers, and politicians send people to war, but only because people are willing to go. Because people are willing to have the job of killing people for money, wars happen. If nobody would have that job, if you couldn't find a single person willing to take money to go kill people, war would end today. So I'm not even going to say that. I'm not even going to say that. Humans, we've lived in a state of war, and in one way, this is sort of. I have mixed feelings about war. On one hand, when two nations go to war, whoever is able to best manage resources and logistics and is able to bring the most manpower to bear, able to organize society the most efficiently, they're more likely to win. And so in one way, there's a type of culling where you sort of you put more pressure to be better. It puts a lot of stress to achieve that you couldn't get. When everything's easy, there's atrophy. When there's no challenge, there's atrophy. And so war provides the greatest challenge for humanity whatsoever. Everything's at stake. And so, us going to war with each other has sort of sharpened us. There's a benefit to it. There's a fictional novel where the aliens, they beat us in technology and space travel, and they get to Earth, but then they lose at war because they've never fought each other. They weren't skilled at it. And it's just a fictional novel, but that idea there, So in one sense, I see a positive side of war, but I think it's mostly negative. I think it'd be most of war comes from people desiring things that don't belong to them, and where they could develop their own country. They lust after other people's stuff, and because there's plenty of people willing to go kill people for money, politicians are able to find soldiers, and wars are able to happen. And they want to put all the blame on the politicians, but you've got people that say, "Pay me to kill people, and I go kill people." The government wouldn't have no teeth if nobody was willing to do that. So some people that, I'm kind of divided about it. Because on one hand, I do think that bravery is a virtue. If people have no love, they'll just always save their own skin. They're not willing to risk anything or sacrifice anything for other people. So there is really a virtue to the courage to go to war, to protect your family and everything. But there has not been a justified war in America for quite some time. There's been some gullible people that believed a lot of lies, but basically these wars have been happened to overthrow 7 countries that did not have a Rothschild central bank and give them a Rothschild central bank. These wars have been to enslave people, not spread freedom. And there's people dumb enough to think they're spreading freedom. There's people ready to pick up that gun and go kill anybody that they're told. And but really, I'm not going to say that it's such. I don't know. It's just, if you're going to go kill people, you need to know why you're doing it. If it's okay to protect your country, to protect people who, if you're being attacked or whatever by an aggressor, you've got no choice but to defend. But 20% of the population of Iraq was killed for no good reason other than to give them a Rothschild central bank. Way more money in that than oil. And because Israel wanted it done. Iraq was never a danger to the U.S., and neither was Afghanistan. NORAD stood down. NORAD had a fake drill to go scramble jets at fake, doing a test to go escort fake planes that didn't even exist at the time of 9/11. NORAD has never not intercepted aircraft in American airspace, and never not been able to scramble jets in time to intercept ever until 9/11. And so I understand. I was there, when 9/11 happened. I remember the mood of the whole country. I remember how everyone felt that we had been unjustifiably attacked and innocent people had been killed for no reason, and a lot of people enlisted. And I was just not old enough to, or I probably would have. My dad was in the Air Force, and I had a whole different set of politics back then. I started off being sort of a neocon Republican, Zionist supporter of Israel, and then I began to move toward more of being a libertarian and a constitutionalist. And then over time, I began to learn more about people, and I realized that governing is a skill, and everybody's not equally good at it. And I don't believe in democracy anymore. I started to believe more kind of toward aristocracy, actually, meritocracy. But I don't, I've got a lot of friends that were just a few years older than me. So they were already 18, and they went and fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they come back. And it almost seems like the government wanted to destroy veterans. Like, they didn't really want to help them. I think they saw them as a liability. They could train people to resist. A lot of my veteran friends, they had a new threshold for excitement, and everything was boring to them now, and it got them into a lot of trouble. They were good people. They were done wrong, really. One of them, he's over there. His wife spends all the money. He wanted to give his son a good life. He grew up in a trailer park and everything. He wanted to give his son, so he volunteered. He didn't even have to go over there. His unit, most of them was sent over there, so he volunteered to go over there. He signed up for disarming bombs. He took every type of anything that would pay more money sent the money back home, trying to give his son college and everything. His woman got on drugs, spent all the money, got pregnant with another man, come back to nothing. I know another one. He bought all kind of things, and had all kind of things sent to his house. His family stole it and come back to nothing. He hung himself, I think, last year. He believed, like before he died, he realized, he'd been tricked. But when he went over there with good intentions. He was a brave man, going to protect his country, which is admirable. But then, before he died, he realized that, we were just puppets of the Jews, bleeding so they wouldn't have to, making Rothschilds rich. It's really, I didn't say autocracy. I'm talking about aristocracy, rule by the best. And I don't mean rule by people claiming they're the best. I mean rule by people who are actually the best. And that's why I wanted to say meritocracy, which is really what I mean. Like in an aristocracy, it normally degrades into democracy, where they're not really true aristocrats anymore. They're who's got the money. But like basically what I'm saying is, like in a true aristocracy, you rule by the best, and it's people who've proven they're the best by their deeds. They've been the bravest, they've been the smartest, they've managed resources the best. It's like you wouldn't want the worst. You wouldn't want to just vote about how to drive an airplane. You would want the person best able to be a pilot to pilot the plane. And I think it's the same way with the country. There's like I forget the name of the principle, but basically in most any field, 20% of the people are responsible for 50% of the output. So when it comes to the ability to govern a country, 20% of the people are just as good as the other 50%. And a democracy, pretty much, you're going to get worse and worse over time with a democracy, because you're going to have a bunch of idiots outvoting the smart people. You're going to have a bunch of parasitic people outvoting the generous people. We should have rule by the best. It shouldn't be one person, one vote. But I'm not an egalitarian. I started off in life being an egalitarian. I mean, pretty much our whole culture is based on the lie of egalitarianism. I don't think it's true. I don't think that equality exists in nature anywhere to be seen. Nature pretty much diversifies. Things change. And whatever is best able to adapt or make use of resources is what wins. And so, I don't believe in democracy. Also, I will say this though. I believe that it's never true that there's a perfect government. There's just a perfect government for the situation. So a lot of times when a nation's really small, they're actually better off to have a king. It's more decisive than arguing about everything. But you can't just be that way forever. Eventually, you're going to have people resenting that guy's the king and they're not. These people have power that they don't. And if you want to keep them working with the system, you're eventually going to have to give them some political power. And it really, there's a cycle. Each form of government creates a people unlike the type of government, unlike the type of people that brought that type of government to power. And so you basically, like, see, if Rome would have stayed a republic, they would not have lasted. And if you go back before they were a republic, if they would have stayed a monarchy, they wouldn't have lasted. There was a time for them to have kings. There was a time for them to be a republic. There was a time for them to be an empire, which maybe I do think that empires, when people they overstep. I don't think it's really good or beneficial for a nation to try to rule over other nations. I think that's where you go too far. And it's normally, there's no recovering from that. But, there's trade-offs. There's no perfect solution because people aren't perfect. So there's pros and cons to every form of government. And you have to take into consideration the temperament of the people that a government is made up of. You've got to take in consideration the worldview of those people, the religion of those people, the economy of those people. Like, a lot of people in America would consider child labor immoral, yet we got where we got because of child labor. There was a time we had a labor shortage. There was a time where Americans were paid almost nothing, and we were only farmers and loggers, and we depended on child labor to run our farms. And then we get to a point to where we have the luxury of not needing child labor, and then we tell other countries, you need to get rid of child labor, when those countries are in a different, they're in a different part of the timeline of development, and they may need child labor so that in the future they don't have to have child labor. There's countries we destroy by giving them free clothes and food, and that wipes out their whole entire economy because they're still at that stage where they're trying to go from hunter-gatherers to an agricultural society, and the farmers are not able to make a profit because all these charities are giving away free food. And the only type of industry there is textiles, making clothes and fabric. And then they're not able to develop because there's people giving them all this free clothes. And so it destroys the foundational businesses that other businesses could have come about later. So sometimes there's not really a one-size-fit-all solution. Governments are tricky. You also got to take into consideration the family dynamic of the people, because that has a lot to do with how people see and view authority and what forms of government people will or will not accept. So a lot of people think that all families in the world are arranged the same way. A father, a mother, and children, but it's not really so. In some societies, you have a father who retains authority over his sons their entire life. And everyone lives together with that father. And until he dies, that father and all of his sons all live in the same house with all of their wives and all of their children. In these type of societies, they almost always have a dictatorship. And they will accept the dictatorship because they will accept their father having authority over them their whole entire lives. And then in America and in England, it's not like that. You do have a father who has authority over his children, which, I mean, they're getting rid of that with all this feminist bullshit and communism and shit. But anyway, in America and England and most places in Europe, the model that I was just talking about is seen like in India and in some other place. Not really India. It isn't to some degree. It's kind of being phased out, but I'm gonna get back to what I was saying. Mostly in the West, when a child becomes an adult, they're no longer under their parents' authority. They may respect their parents or whatever, but they don't feel like they have to do whatever their daddy tells them to, that they have to be a part of their father's business. They can go out and do their own thing. And then you have families where there's not even a mother, like no one even knows who their dad is. There's tribal societies where the women and men meet at a campfire and the women fuck whoever they want to fuck, and the male figure in children's lives are their uncles because they know who their mama's brother is, but they have no idea who their fathers are. And in none of those societies can get past tribalism to a nation state. Those societies, none of them can meet at a certain fixed time. It's chaotic. They're just barely even have a government. It's almost anarchy. It's just, there's some tribes in China like that, but the Chinese government's forcing it out. They're outlawing it, and they're forcing marriage upon them. There's some societies in Africa and South America like that. There's not many. There's almost none like that. But you can see in America, it's like trending that way. We've got baby daddies, baby mamas. I kind of think that one day you'll look at America and it'll be like a bunch of tribal. It'll break up and It'll be a bunch of tribal gangland from coast to coast. People twerking, doing drugs, barely wearing any clothes. It'll just we're trending away from civilization. And then I think some of these other places that seem so backwards, they're going to have their day in the sun. They're working toward being civilized. They're advancing. We're in decay. Sir John Glubb wrote an essay called The Fate of Empires. And he talks about this cycle that normally all empires follow. Always. You should look out the window and see I'm here. I don't know why she's calling. I'm going to end this stream because I got to take a phone call and helping them build their military. But he noticed that there's a pattern. Hello.
Hey, can I talk real quick?
Yeah, I'm going to get off the line.
You be on longer.
I'll get off.